Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and as always told, I had a voice radio, so today I'm going to be showing you Mewtwo GX, and stop me if you've heard something similar to this. Mewtwo gets an awful lot of cards in the Pokemon trading card game, although this is the first Mewtwo GX. And actually, as a side note before we start here, for newer players, I know a lot of you will already know this, you cannot Mega Evolve from Mewtwo GX. You must Mega Evolve from Mewtwo EX. Now, being a Psychic type means you're hitting weakness on stuff like Garbodor, Trubbish, which will be relevant as we'll see in a minute, and Espeon. But of course, you're also weak to Psychic, which is a bit of a problem with Garbodor running around. Garbodor needs just 5 items in your discard pile to get himself a one-hit KO on you. 190 HP is very good for a basic GX, you're right up there with Lapras, and the retreat cost of 2 is decidedly meh. Now, this is going to be coming out in Japan's Shining Legend set, which we're going to be getting as our own Shining Legend set, but there's going to be a video coming on that in a couple of hours, so I'm going to explain it in more detail there. Now, the first attack for Mewtwo GX does 30 damage for every energy on Mewtwo, and you're doing this for 1 psychic energy. Well, a minimum of 1 psychic energy, because then the more you add, the more you do. 1 psychic energy, you're doing 30 damage, 2 psychic energy, you're doing 60 damage, and so on and so forth. But it's only the energy on Mewtwo, not the defending Pokemon, so that is to say it's more like Scattershot than Psychic Infinity. But because it says any energy, and as with all of these, the translation is subject to change, but there is no psychic energy symbol on the card here, so I feel good about this. It's any energy, so double colourless energy would count as 60. Now, you can't put a double colourless energy on there and immediately do 60. You need to have a psychic energy on there. But as soon as you do, you can pile on double colourless and off you go. And of course, being that he's a basic Pokemon, you can also use Max Elixir here. Look at the top 6 cards of your deck, find a basic energy you find and attach it to one of your benched basic Pokemon. So you can do that to really pile energy onto Mewtwo so that you can hit very hard rather fast. And don't forget, of course, that we've got Mew. Now, I profiled Mew just yesterday. For 1 psychic energy, Mew allows you to search your deck for 2 energy and attach them to your Pokemon in any way that you like. So you could here with Mew actually search for a psychic and a double colourless, and then at the beginning of your next turn, Mewtwo's already got free energy ready to go. And I like the fact that Mew is a very obvious partner, a nice support for his big buddy Mewtwo here. That sounds fair to me. And one option you have with Mewtwo here is just to pile energy on and smash, just like we all did with the Mewtwo EX from Next Destinies, which, interestingly enough, was the very first Mewtwo EX we ever had. Now, you might be thinking Garbodor's a huge problem for this card, and it is and it isn't. Because 2 energy here, with either the first or second attack, but we'll get to the second in a moment, gets you a one-hit KO. And with Trubbish, you can actually get a one-hit KO for 1 energy if you play a Professor Kukui. And if you're going second, you can do this on your very first turn. Remember, you can't attack going first. You just have to make sure you don't play many item cards. So you play Shuffle Draw like N, rather than more aggressive discarding-based draw like Professor Sycamore. You play few items, manually attached, take it easy, and you can actually start KOing Trubbishes and Garbodor here very early on in the game, and maybe actually giving yourself an advantage with Mewtwo. Now, in the mid to late game, when you've inevitably played a bunch of items, maybe Mewtwo won't be all that good anymore, but in the early game, it can really, really help. Now, the second attack for a Psychic and a Colourless does 60 damage and heals 30. But of course, remember that you've got 190 HP, which is a lot, and although you'll probably usually be using Choice Band here, you could even play Fighting Fury Bout, given that Mewtwo is a basic, and then you've got 230 HP, and you're healing 30 damage from yourself with every attack. This adds up quite nicely. This gives Mewtwo a little bit of tanking where you're not being hit for weakness. And doing 60 damage means you're doing the perfect amount of damage to get a one-hit KO on Garbodor. And of course, we've got Choice Band here, and most of the time nowadays it is going to be Choice Band over Fighting Fury Belt. This puts you up to 90 damage, which means those pesky EXs and basic GXs will usually be going down in 2 hits. And let's not forget that you may well here have 190 HP and be healing 30 every turn, so they could be struggling to KO you. And with a Choice Band and a Professor Kukui, you're doing 110 damage, which will be a one-hit KO on Shaymin, although we are expecting, and it's very likely, that Shaymin EX will be rotated by the time this comes around. Either way, it'll still be legal and expanded, and getting a one-hit KO on Shaymin is always a good thing. And that leads us to the GX attack. Free Psychic Energy, 200 damage, not affected by any effects on the defending Pokemon. So it's one of your classic big one-hit KO at some point during the game attacks. And 200 is one of these almost perfect numbers that Pokemon love chucking at us. 200 isn't actually enough to KO anything, but you add a Choice Band here, you're going up to 230. You add a Professor Kukui here, you're going up to 250. And that is enough to basically one-hit KO anything. Although given that I'm a pedant, I probably should point out Solgaleo GX, who has 250 HP and a resistance to Psychic. There we go. Now, the energy is a little bit of a pain here. Free Psychic Energy is quite a lot. But remember I talked about Mew earlier, and I've talked about Max Elixir, and you can even use Wish Baton here. That's the new tool card coming in Burning Shadows, whereby if it's attached to an active Pokemon that gets KO'd, you can take free basic energy from the Pokemon that's KO'd with Wish Baton attached, and pop it on one of your benched Pokemon. And of course, we should dwell for a moment on the effect of this attack, that it goes through any effects on the defending Pokemon. So let's take something like a Jolteon EX. It uses Flash Ray, and generally you would prevent all damage done to it by attacks from basic Pokemon. Well, that's an effect on the defending Pokemon, so you would go right through that and you would get the KO anyway. Let's take Toxapex GX. His GX attack says prevent all effects of attacks, including damage, done to this Pokemon during your opponent's next turn. Well, that's an effect on the defending Pokemon, which means that Mewtwo GX ain't got no time for that. He's going to go right through and get a nice, easy one-hit KO. Energy cost aside, this is a really, really tasty GX attack, because not only does it get that big one-hit KO you're craving near the end of the game, but it goes through so many annoying Pokemon that you might otherwise have trouble with. Now, the last question I want to address before we finish with this nice little video. How worried should we be about weakness? Now, you can always play something else, of course, here. Mewtwo's a basic Pokemon. You're unlikely to be playing 4 Mewtwo and no other Pokemon, so if you're really worried about the weakness to Psychic, just play something else. Basics are very easily teched in. Now, you might start with Mewtwo if you play it, but you can always just play Ninja Boy to switch out of Mewtwo into something else. That'll fix that problem. And then you can play any Pokemon that uses Psychic or Colourless Energy. So Drampa GX, Tauros GX. Heck, you could even play Garbodor himself. You could even tech this into a Garbodor deck with something like Espeon, Drampa, Tauros, etc. And don't forget that it's not just you being weak to Garbodor, it's Garbodor and Trubbish being weak to you. Now, some Garbodor decks like playing Rainbow Energy onto Trubbish. Well, that means you'll get a KO on them for 1 energy. Or you can play something like Professor Kukui, or even maybe something like Plus Power gets a reprint in the near future. And yes, I know it's an item card, so it means that you're going to be fueling Garbodor's attack. But like I've said, in the early game, take down a couple of Trubbishes, get a couple of prizes, but also force your opponent to have to recover those Trubbishes. Force them to have something like a rescue stretcher in order to set up that later Garbodor to get the KOs. Once you've taken down a couple of Trubbish, it really doesn't matter if you get KO'd back and give up a couple of prizes. And that's why I'm not that worried about weakness here, but you've got to play it carefully. If you just play a Speed Mewtwo deck with a whole bunch of Choice Bands and Max Elixirs and Professor Sycamores, you will get absolutely trashed by Garbodor. Yes, that was deliberate. However, if you have a more shuffle-based deck, then you can really take advantage of early prizes on Trubbish and Garbodor in the early game, and transition to another Pokemon in the late game. Now, before I tell you how many Wassies I'm going to give this, very quickly, reminder, twitch.tv/PTCGRadio, 8 PM UK time tonight. Google that to find it in your local time zone. Very first PTCG Radio live stream. Check it out, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be amazing. Now, as for Mewtwo, it's not amazing, but it's a solid free Wassie card, and honestly it feels a little bit low. I like the first attack, and the GX attack can be really, really handy depending on what you're playing, but I don't love it. Free Wassies seems fair. I could certainly see this being teched into decks that are already playing Psychic Energy. Now, you know the deal. There is a comment section. Go nuts. Be nice. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at The Wassie. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel. And the most important thing as always, look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.